The clock on the wall showed exactly 6 in the evening when Maria Santos pushed through the service entrance of the Grand Meridian Hotel. She had done this same thing every single day for the past 11 years. Same door, same time, same gray uniform that smelled like detergent and coffee. She walked down the narrow hallway that staff members used, past the kitchen where cooks were already shouting at each other, past the storage room filled with cleaning supplies, and into the small locker area where she kept her things. Maria opened her locker and looked at the tiny photograph taped inside the door. It showed a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, sitting at a piano, smiling like she owned the whole world. That woman was her. 30 years ago. A lifetime ago. She closed the locker quickly, the way she always did, and grabbed her cleaning cart. Tonight, she was assigned to the executive lounge on the 42nd floor. It was the most expensive space in the entire hotel. The kind of place where a single bottle of wine cost more than her monthly rent. The kind of place where people made decisions that affected thousands of lives while eating tiny sandwiches and laughing about their vacation homes. Maria had cleaned that lounge hundreds of times. She knew every corner, every table, every scratch on the marble floor. She knew which chairs the important people preferred, and which spots near the window had the best view of the city lights below. But most importantly, she knew how to be invisible. That was the real skill in her job, not the cleaning. Anyone could wipe a table or pick up empty glasses. The real skill was learning how to exist in a room full of powerful people without any of them noticing you were there. You kept your eyes down. You moved quietly. You never spoke unless someone spoke to you first, which almost never happened. To them, she was not a person. She was part of the furniture. Just another object in the room that somehow kept itself clean. Maria took the service elevator up to the 42nd floor. When the doors opened, she could already hear voices coming from the main lounge area. There was some kind of big meeting happening tonight. She had heard the other staff talking about it earlier. Something about 2 companies coming together. Something about a lot of money. She did not care about the details. Rich people were always doing rich people things. Her job was simple. Keep the tables clean. Collect the empty glasses. Stay out of the way. She pushed her cart into the lounge and immediately felt the tension in the air. It was thick, like humidity before a storm. Men in expensive suits stood in small groups, talking in low voices. Some spoke English. Others spoke Japanese. Translators moved between them, looking stressed and tired. Maria began her work at the far end of the room, near the windows. She picked up a glass that someone had left on a side table. Then another. Then a small plate with crumbs on it. She wiped down the surfaces with a cloth, making small circles, the same way she had done 10,000 times before. Nobody looked at her. Nobody said hello or thank you or excuse me. She was a ghost. And she was fine with that. But as she worked, her eyes kept drifting to something in the corner of the room. Something that made her chest feel tight every time she saw it. A piano. It was a Steinway grand piano, black and shining under the soft lights. The hotel had placed it there for decoration, the same way they placed flowers and paintings and sculptures. It was meant to look impressive. It was meant to tell guests that this was a place of culture and class. Maria doubted anyone had played it in years. She turned away and continued cleaning, but she could feel the piano behind her like a presence. Like an old friend she had been avoiding. Like a memory she had spent 3 decades trying to forget. Once upon a time, Maria Santos was not a cleaning lady. Once upon a time, she was someone else entirely. She grew up in a small apartment in Lisbon, Portugal, with her mother and grandmother. They did not have much money. Her mother worked 2 jobs, and her grandmother sold bread at the local market. But somehow, when Maria was 6 years old, her grandmother managed to buy an old piano from a neighbor who was moving away. It was not a beautiful piano. Some of the keys stuck, and it was always slightly out of tune. But to little Maria, it was the most magical thing she had ever seen. She taught herself to play by listening to the radio and copying what she heard. By the time she was 10, she could play songs that made her grandmother cry with happiness. By the time she was 15, She had won 3 national competitions. By the time she was 19, she had earned a full scholarship to the Lisbon Conservatory, the most prestigious music school in the country. The professors there said she was gifted. They said she had something special, something that could not be taught. One critic wrote that her fingers did not just play notes but told stories. Another said that listening to her was like watching someone speak directly to God. Maria remembered those days like scenes from a movie about someone else's life. The practice rooms where she spent 12 hours a day. The concerts, where hundreds of people held their breath while she played. The standing ovations that made her feel like she was floating above the ground. She was going to be famous. She was going to travel the world. She was going to make her mother and grandmother proud. And then, on a rainy night in March, everything ended. She was 21 years old, riding in a taxi on her way home from a late rehearsal. The driver ran a red light. Another car hit them from the side. Maria remembered the sound of breaking glass, the spinning of the world, and then nothing. She woke up in a hospital 3 days later with her left hand wrapped in heavy bandages. The doctors told her the news gently. The way you tell someone that a loved one has died. 3 bones in her hand were shattered. They had done their best to repair the damage, but there would be permanent limitations. She might regain basic function over time. She might be able to do normal things like hold a cup or write her name, but playing piano at a professional level? That was over. Maria remembered lying in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like someone had reached inside her chest and removed her heart. Music was not just something she did. It was who she was. Without it, she did not know how to exist. She tried to recover. For 2 years, she went to therapy and did exercises and forced her damaged hand to move in ways it no longer wanted to move. She sat at pianos and attempted to play, but her left hand was too slow, too weak, too broken. The music that came out was clumsy and wrong, like a bird trying to fly with a damaged wing. Eventually, she stopped trying. She sold her piano. She packed a single suitcase. She bought a one-way ticket to New York City, where nobody knew her name or her story or what she had lost. She found a job cleaning hotel rooms. Then she found a job cleaning offices. Then she found this job at the Grand Meridian, wiping tables in rooms where millionaires complained about their problems. 11 years. That is how long she had worked here. 11 years of being invisible. 11 years of walking past pianos without touching them. 11 years of pretending that the girl from Lisbon had never existed. But tonight, something felt different. Maria finished cleaning the last table near the window and turned to push her cart toward the service area. As she moved across the room, she heard raised voices near the center of the lounge. 2 men were arguing, one American and one Japanese, with translators desperately trying to keep up. She did not understand what they were fighting about. Business things, money things, things that had nothing to do with her. But as she passed by the grand piano, she let her fingers brush against its smooth surface, just for a moment, and something inside her, something she thought had died long ago, began to wake up. The executive lounge of the Grand Meridian Hotel had seen many important meetings over the years. Politicians had shaken hands here. Movie stars had celebrated here. Billionaires had argued over contracts worth more money than most people could imagine. But tonight was different. Tonight felt heavier somehow, like the air itself was holding its breath. Maria pushed her cleaning cart to a quiet corner of the room and pretended to organize her supplies while she watched what was happening. She knew she should not be curious. She knew it was not her business. But something about the energy in this room made it impossible to look away. There were 2 groups of people, and they sat on opposite sides of a long table made of dark polished wood. On one side were the Americans, on the other side were the Japanese, and in the middle, where they should have been meeting and agreeing and smiling, there was only cold, empty space. The American group was led by a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a red face. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Maria earned in 3 months, and he had the kind of confidence that came from always getting what he wanted. His name was Robert Harrington, and he was the CEO of one of the biggest technology companies in the United States. Maria had seen men like him before. They walked into rooms expecting everyone to listen. They spoke loudly and interrupted others. They believed that power meant never having to wait for anything or anyone. On the other side of the table sat the Japanese delegation, led by an older gentleman with white hair and calm eyes. His name was Kenji Nakamura, and he was the chairman of a semiconductor company that had been in his family for 3 generations. Unlike the American, he sat very still, his hands folded in front of him, his expression impossible to read. Maria noticed that Mr. Nakamura had barely spoken all evening. He listened. He nodded sometimes. But mostly, he just watched, like a man studying a chess game that was not going well. Between the two groups, translators worked frantically to keep up with the conversation. They looked exhausted and stressed, their voices getting tighter with each passing hour. From what Maria could understand, the two companies were trying to merge. The American company made computers and phones. The Japanese company made the tiny chips that went inside them. Together, they would become one of the most powerful technology companies in the world. But something had gone wrong. Robert Harrington leaned forward and slapped his hand on the table, making several people jump. His voice was loud enough for Maria to hear clearly from across the room. Look, we've been going back and forth on this for 6 hours now. 6 hours. I have a flight to catch tomorrow morning. And I'm not leaving this room without a signed agreement. So let's cut the small talk and get to the numbers. The translator hesitated before speaking to Mr. Nakamura in Japanese. Maria watched the old man's face carefully. Something flickered in his eyes. It was small, barely visible. But it was there, displeasure, maybe even hurt. One of the Japanese executives leaned over and whispered something to Mr. Nakamura. The chairman nodded slightly, but said nothing. Another American executive, a younger man with glasses, tried to smooth things over. What Robert means is that we're very eager to finalize this partnership. We've come a long way, and we believe this merger will benefit both our companies enormously. Yes. Yes. Robert Harrington interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. Benefits, synergies, all that stuff. We've been over it 100 times. The question is simple. Are we doing this deal or not? I need a yes or no answer. Maria noticed several of the Japanese executives exchange uncomfortable glances. In their culture, she had heard, business was not done this way. Deals were built on relationships and trust, not demands and deadlines. Rushing someone into a decision was considered disrespectful, especially someone of Mr. Nakamura's age and status. But Robert Harrington either did not know this or did not care. The translator spoke again in Japanese. Mr. Nakamura listened, then finally opened his mouth to respond. His voice was soft and measured, completely different from the American's booming tone. The translator converted his words to English. Chairman Nakamura says that important decisions should not be rushed. He says that a partnership is like a marriage. It requires patience, understanding, and mutual respect. He asks for more time to consider the terms. Robert Harrington's face turned a deeper shade of red. More time? We've given you months of time. We've flown halfway around the world for this meeting. My board is expecting an answer by Monday morning. With all due respect, Chairman, time is money, and we've spent plenty of both. Maria saw it then. The moment everything changed, Mr. Nakamura's calm expression shifted. Just slightly. His jaw tightened. His eyes grew distant. He had been insulted. Not by the words themselves, but by the tone behind them, by the assumption that his company's 60-year legacy could be reduced to a quick decision made under pressure. He said something quietly in Japanese to his assistant. The assistant nodded, looking worried. One of the Japanese executives stood up and bowed slightly toward the Americans. Perhaps we should take a short break. Some fresh air might help everyone think more clearly. A break? Robert Harrington laughed. But there was no humor in it. We don't need a break. We need a signature on a piece of paper. That's all. One signature, and we can all go home happy. Maria moved to a nearby table and began wiping it down. Even though it was already clean, she wanted to stay close enough to watch what was happening. Something told her this night was far from over. The tension in the room was unbearable now. The American executives were frustrated, checking their watches and phones. The Japanese delegation was silent, their faces like stone walls. And Mr. Nakamura, the man whose decision would determine everything, sat perfectly still, with his eyes closed. Maria had seen enough rich people to know what was coming. The deal was falling apart. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not officially. But the trust was broken. You could almost see it cracking like ice on a winter lake. She felt sorry for them, in a strange way. All these powerful people with all their money and lawyers and private jets, and they could not figure out how to simply talk to each other. They spoke different languages, sure, but that was not the real problem. The real problem was that they lived in different worlds. Robert Harrington saw business as a battle to be won. Kenji Nakamura saw it as a relationship to be nurtured. And neither one of them knew how to build a bridge to the other side. Maria finished wiping the table and moved toward the back of the room where the grand piano stood silent and untouched. She collected a few empty glasses from a nearby shelf and placed them on her cart. That is when she heard it. Mr. Nakamura was speaking quietly to his assistant again, and this time, Maria was close enough to catch some of the words. She did not speak Japanese, but certain words sounded almost the same in any language. One word stood out clearly. Debussy. Maria froze. Claude Debussy. The French composer. She knew his music better than she knew her own heartbeat. She had played his pieces hundreds of times in her old life, the life before the accident, the life before she became invisible, and his most famous piece, the one that pianists all over the world used to test the depth of their soul, was called Clair de Lune. It meant moonlight in French. And it was the most beautiful, the most heartbreaking, the most human piece of music ever written. It was also the last piece Maria had ever performed in public. The night before her accident destroyed everything. She looked at Mr. Nakamura. The old man's eyes were still closed, but his expression had changed. The hardness was gone. In its place was something soft and sad, like a man remembering something precious that he had lost. Maria understood that look. She saw it in her own mirror every morning. Without thinking, she turned to look at the grand piano. It sat there in the corner, black and beautiful, waiting for someone to bring it to life. Her hands began to tremble. No, she told herself. That part of your life is over. You are a cleaning lady now. You wipe tables. You collect glasses. You stay invisible. But her feet would not move. Her eyes would not leave the piano. And somewhere deep inside her chest, a tiny flame that she thought had died long ago began to flicker. The meeting continued. The arguments grew louder. The deal moved closer and closer to complete collapse. And Maria Santos stood frozen in the shadows, caught between the woman she used to be and the woman she had become, wondering if she still had the courage to do something impossible. Maria could not move. Her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. The word kept echoing in her mind. Debussy, Debussy, Debussy. She watched Mr. Nakamura, the Japanese chairman, as he sat with his eyes closed. His lips moved slightly, like he was remembering something from long ago. Something painful, something beautiful. Maria knew that look, because she had worn it herself for 30 years. What was Debussy to him? Why did that name make his hard expression melt into something so tender and sad? She would never know the answer. It was not her place to ask. She was just the cleaning lady. The invisible woman with the cart full of dirty glasses and used napkins. Her job was to wipe tables, not to wonder about the secret sorrows of billionaires. But still, she could not move. The meeting was getting worse. Robert Harrington, the American CEO, was pacing now, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble floor. His voice had grown louder, sharper, like a knife cutting through the air. "This is ridiculous," he said, throwing his hands up. "Absolutely ridiculous. We came here in good faith. We offered you a fair deal, a generous deal, and you sit there like a statue, saying nothing, asking for more time. What kind of way is this to do business?" The translator hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. She spoke to Mr. Nakamura in Japanese, softening the words as much as she could. But everyone in the room knew what had been said. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Mr. Nakamura opened his eyes. For a moment, he looked directly at Robert Harrington, and something passed between them. It was not anger exactly. It was something deeper. Disappointment. Maybe. Or resignation. The chairman turned to his assistant and spoke a few quiet words in Japanese. The assistant's face went pale. "What did he say?" Robert Harrington demanded. "What's going on?" The translator swallowed hard. "Chairman Nakamura says that he believes there has been a misunderstanding. He says that perhaps your two companies are not as compatible as he had hoped. He thanks you for your time and wishes you safe travels home." All the 17 with 17. The room went silent. Maria watched as the meaning of those words sank into everyone's minds. The deal was over. $1.2 billion, gone in an instant. Months of negotiations, hundreds of lawyers, thousands of emails and phone calls and meetings, all of it wasted. Robert Harrington's face turned from red to white. "You can't be serious. You're walking away? Over what? Because I asked for a decision? Because I showed a little urgency?" Mr. Nakamura did not respond. He simply folded his hands in his lap and looked down at the table. The conversation finished as far as he was concerned. The Japanese executives began to gather their papers. One of them reached for a briefcase. Another checked his phone, probably looking for flights back to Tokyo. The American side erupted into chaos. People were talking over each other, pointing fingers, making desperate phone calls. Someone mentioned shareholders. Someone else mentioned lawsuits. A young woman in a gray suit looked like she was about to cry. And through all of this, Maria stood frozen in the corner, still staring at the piano. She thought about her life. She thought about the past 11 years of emptiness, of going through the motions, of waking up every morning with nothing to look forward to, except more tables to clean and more invisible hours to survive. She thought about her grandmother, who had saved every penny for months to buy that old broken piano. She thought about her mother, who had worked double shifts so Maria could attend music school. She thought about all the people who had believed in her, who had sacrificed for her, who had told her she was special. And she thought about the accident. The rain, the spinning headlights, the sound of metal crushing against metal, the moment when everything she was, everything she had worked for, was taken away in a single heartbeat. For 30 years, she had blamed that night. She had blamed the taxi driver, the other car, the slippery roads, God himself. She had spent 3 decades hiding from the world because she could not face what she had lost. But standing here now, watching a billion-dollar deal collapse because 2 groups of people could not find a way to connect, Maria suddenly understood something. The accident had taken her career. It had taken her future as a concert pianist. But it had not taken her hands. It had not taken her memory. It had not taken the music that still lived somewhere deep inside her soul. She had given those things away herself. She had buried them out of fear and shame and grief. And she had spent the rest of her life pretending they had never existed. Maria looked at her left hand. The scar was still there, a thin white line running across her knuckles. The doctors had told her she would never play professionally again. And they were right. She would never have the speed, the precision, the technical perfection that professional playing required. But Claire de Lune was not about speed. It was not about technical perfection. It was about feeling. It was about letting the music speak for itself. Could she still do that? After all these years, after all this silence, could she still make the piano sing? She did not know. But suddenly, more than anything in the world, she wanted to find out. Maria set down her cleaning rag. She left her cart where it stood, and she began to walk across the room. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could feel it in her throat. Every step felt like a mile. People were still arguing, still shouting, still trying to save the impossible deal. Nobody noticed the cleaning lady walking through the middle of the chaos. Nobody ever noticed her, until she sat down at the piano. The bench was cold beneath her. The keys stretched out in front of her, black and white, perfectly ordered, waiting. She had not touched a piano in over a decade. She had not even allowed herself to look at one for more than a few seconds. And now here she was, her damaged hands hovering over the keys. In a room full of the most powerful business people in the world, someone noticed her first. A young American executive who had been typing furiously on his phone. He looked up, saw the cleaning lady sitting at the piano, and his mouth fell open. "Hey," he said loudly. "Hey, what are you doing? You can't be there." More heads turned. The arguing stopped. Security guards began moving toward her, their faces confused and annoyed. Robert Harrington stared at her like she had lost her mind. "What the hell is this? Someone get her out of there." Maria's hands were shaking. Every instinct told her to run, to apologize, to go back to being invisible. This was insane. This was the craziest thing she had ever done in her entire life. But then she looked across the room and saw Mr. Nakamura. The old chairman had turned in his chair to face her. His expression was curious, not angry. His eyes met hers. And in that moment, Maria saw something she recognized. Loneliness, loss, a hunger for something beautiful in a world that had become cold and hard. He knew that feeling. She knew that feeling. They were strangers from opposite sides of the world. But in that one moment, they understood each other perfectly. Maria took a deep breath. She placed her fingers on the keys, and she began to play. The first notes of Clair de Lune floated into the air, soft and delicate, like the first light of dawn breaking through darkness. Her left hand moved slower than it used to, stiffer, less certain, but her right hand remembered everything. And together, somehow, they found their way. The security guards stopped walking. Robert Harrington stopped shouting. Every single person in that room stopped whatever they were doing and turned to listen, because the music was beautiful. Imperfect and broken and beautiful. Just like her, just like all of them. The music filled the room like water filling an empty glass. It started soft, almost like a whisper, and then it grew, spreading into every corner, touching every person, making time itself slow down. Maria's fingers moved across the keys, and for the first time in 30 years, she remembered who she really was. She was not a cleaning lady. She was not invisible. She was a musician. She had always been a musician. The accident had broken her hand, but it had never broken her soul. She had just forgotten that, somewhere along the way. Her left hand was slow. It stumbled on notes that should have been easy. It could not keep up the way it used to. But somehow, that did not matter. The imperfections became part of the music, like cracks in an old painting that only make it more beautiful. The security guards who had been walking toward her stopped in their tracks. They stood frozen, their hands at their sides, their tough expressions melting into something softer. The American executives stopped checking their phones. The Japanese businessmen stopped gathering their papers. Everyone in that room, every single person, stopped whatever they were doing and turned to face the piano. Because the music was not just sound, it was feeling. It was memory. It was every sad and beautiful moment that anyone had ever experienced, all wrapped up in notes that seemed to float through the air like snowflakes. Maria closed her eyes and let the music carry her away. She was 19 again, sitting on stage at the Lisbon Conservatory, playing for a crowd that held its breath with every note. She was 12 again, practicing in her grandmother's tiny apartment while the smell of bread drifted in from the kitchen. She was 6 again, touching piano keys for the first time, discovering that her small fingers could create something magical. All those years came back to her. All those memories she had tried so hard to bury. They rose up from somewhere deep inside her chest and poured out through her hands into the piano. Tears started rolling down her cheeks, but she did not stop playing. She could not stop. The music had taken control, and all she could do was follow where it led. Across the room, something was happening to Mr. Nakamura. The old chairman had been sitting rigid and closed off, ready to leave, ready to give up on the deal and go home. But now his posture had changed. His shoulders dropped, his hands, which had been folded tightly in his lap, relaxed and opened. His eyes, which had been hard and distant, began to shine with tears. He was remembering something too. Many years ago, before he became a powerful businessman, before he built his empire, before the world knew his name, Kenji Nakamura was just a little boy growing up in a small village outside Kyoto. His family was poor. His father worked long hours in a factory. His mother took care of him and his three sisters in a house with thin walls and a leaky roof. They did not have much, but they had each other, and they had music. His mother loved Debussy. She had an old record player that she had saved for years to buy, and her most treasured possession was a scratched vinyl record of Clair de Lune. Every night, before the children went to sleep, she would play that record and sit with them in the dark, listening to the music fill their tiny home. "This is moonlight," she would tell them in Japanese. "This is what the moon sounds like when it sings." Kenji never forgot those nights. Even as he grew older, even as he became successful and wealthy and powerful, he carried those memories with him like a secret treasure hidden in his heart. His mother passed away when he was 23. He was in Tokyo, working his first job, too busy to come home when she got sick. By the time he arrived at the hospital, she was already gone. He never forgave himself for that, and he never listened to Clair de Lune again. It hurt too much. The music reminded him of everything he had lost, everything he had sacrificed for success. But now, sitting in this hotel room on the other side of the world, listening to a cleaning lady play on a grand piano, all those old wounds opened up again. And somehow, this time, they did not hurt, they healed. Mr. Nakamura stood up slowly from his chair. Everyone watched him, but he did not notice. He only saw the woman at the piano, this stranger who somehow knew exactly what he needed to hear. He walked toward her, one step at a time, moving through the silent crowd of executives and lawyers and translators. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody said a word. Maria opened her eyes and saw him coming. She almost stopped playing, startled by the sight of this powerful man approaching her with tears streaming down his face. But something told her to keep going. Something told her the music was not finished yet. Mr. Nakamura reached the piano and stopped. He stood there, watching her hands move across the keys, listening to every note as if it was a message meant only for him. The music reached its final section. The notes grew softer, slower, more tender. Maria poured everything she had left into those last moments. All her pain, all her loneliness, all the years of silence and hiding and pretending to be someone she was not. And then, finally, the last note faded into the air. The room was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Maria sat with her hands still resting on the keys, afraid to look up, afraid to see the faces around her. What had she done? She had interrupted a billion-dollar business meeting to play piano. She would be fired for sure, maybe arrested, maybe worse. But then she heard something she did not expect. Mr. Nakamura was clapping. It started slowly, just his two hands coming together in a soft, steady rhythm. Then others joined in. First the Japanese executives. Then, one by one, the Americans. Even Robert Harrington, the man who had been so angry and impatient all night, began to clap. The applause grew louder, filling the room, washing over Maria like a wave. She finally looked up and saw Mr. Nakamura standing right in front of her. The powerful chairman of a billion-dollar company. The man whose decision could change the future of two nations. He was smiling. And crying. At the same time, slowly, carefully, he bowed to her. It was a deep bow. The kind that showed the highest respect in Japanese culture. The kind of bow you gave to a teacher, or an elder, or someone who had given you a precious gift. Maria did not know what to do. She started to stand up, to apologize, to explain herself. But before she could speak, Mr. Nakamura said something in English. His voice was soft and rough with emotion. "My mother," he said. "My mother used to play this for me. Every night. When I was a child. I have not heard it since she died. 40 years ago. He paused, swallowing hard. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for bringing her back to me. Maria felt her own tears coming faster now. She wanted to tell him that she understood. She wanted to tell him about her grandmother, about her accident, about all the years she had spent running from her own memories. But she did not need to say anything. He already knew. She could see it in his eyes. They stood there for a long moment, two strangers connected by something deeper than words, while the rest of the room watched in stunned silence. Then Mr. Nakamura turned around and looked at Robert Harrington. The American CEO looked confused, uncertain, completely out of his depth. This was not the kind of situation they taught in business school. There was no playbook for what had just happened. Mr. Nakamura smiled gently at him. Perhaps, he said, we have forgotten something important tonight. Perhaps we have been so focused on numbers and contracts and deadlines that we forgot we are all human beings. He turned to look at Maria one more time. This woman reminded me. Maybe now we can begin again. With respect. With patience. With open hearts. The room remained silent, waiting to see what would happen next. And Maria Santos, the invisible cleaning lady who had not played piano in 30 years, finally understood that some things can never truly be lost. They just wait for the right moment to be found again. The negotiations resumed at 10:30 that night. But everything was different now. The long table that had felt like a battlefield just an hour ago now felt like a gathering of old friends. Robert Harrington had loosened his tie. Mr. Nakamura had ordered tea for everyone. The translators, who had looked so stressed and exhausted before, were smiling as they worked. And Maria Santos sat in a chair near the window, watching it all happen. The hotel manager had rushed up to the 42nd floor when he heard what happened. Maria was sure she would be fired on the spot. She had abandoned her cleaning duties, interrupted an important meeting, and made a spectacle of herself in front of the hotel's most valuable guests. But instead of firing her, the manager just stood there with his mouth open, listening as Mr. Nakamura explained what had happened. The Japanese chairman spoke highly of Maria, calling her a gifted artist and a brave woman. He asked, very politely, if she could stay for the rest of the evening. The manager agreed immediately. How could he say no? So Maria sat by the window, still wearing her gray cleaning uniform, still smelling like detergent and coffee, and watched as two of the biggest companies in the world finally found a way to work together. The conversation was different now. Robert Harrington still spoke loudly, but there was warmth in his voice instead of impatience. He asked questions about Mr. Nakamura's family, his company's history, his vision for the future. He listened to the answers instead of interrupting. Mr. Nakamura, in turn, opened up in ways he never had before. He talked about his father, who had worked in a factory his whole life and died without ever seeing his son's success. He talked about his grandchildren, who he hoped would carry on the family business one day. He even laughed a few times, a soft, gentle sound that made everyone around him relax. By midnight, the deal was done. The lawyers drew up the final papers. The executives shook hands and posed for photographs. Champagne was poured, though Mr. Nakamura preferred tea. Everyone agreed that this was the beginning of something special, a partnership that would change the technology industry for decades to come. But the real story, the one that would spread far beyond that hotel room, was just beginning. One of the American executives had recorded Maria's performance on his phone. He did not mean to share it with anyone. He just wanted to remember what he had witnessed that night. But he showed it to his wife when he got home. And she showed it to her sister, and her sister posted it online. Within 3 days, the video had been viewed over 2 million times. The headlines spread across news websites and social media like wildfire. The cleaning lady who saved $1 billion deal. People could not stop talking about it. Television programs wanted to interview Maria. Newspapers sent reporters to find her. Strangers on the internet searched for her name, her history, her story. Maria was overwhelmed. For 11 years, she had been invisible. Now, suddenly, the whole world wanted to see her. She thought about hiding. She thought about refusing all the interviews and going back to her quiet life of wiping tables and collecting glasses. That would be the safe choice. the comfortable choice. But then she remembered how it felt to sit at that piano. She remembered the music flowing through her fingers like water through a river. She remembered the look on Mr. Nakamura's face when he bowed to her. She had spent 30 years hiding from herself. Maybe it was time to stop. Maria agreed to one interview, then another, then another. She told her story honestly, without exaggeration or self-pity. She talked about her childhood in Lisbon, her years at the conservatory, the accident that changed everything. She talked about the fear and shame that had kept her silent for so long, and she talked about what she had learned that night at the Grand Meridian Hotel. "I thought my gift was gone," she said in one interview. "I thought when I lost my ability to play perfectly, I lost everything. But I was wrong. The gift was never about being perfect. It was about being brave enough to share what is inside you. Even when you are scared, even when you think no one will listen." Her words touched something deep in people all over the world. She received thousands of letters and emails from strangers who had their own stories of loss and fear. People who had given up on their dreams, people who had hidden their true selves because they were afraid of being judged, people who had forgotten that they were allowed to try again. Maria read every single message, and she answered as many as she could. 3 months after that night in the hotel, something unexpected happened. Maria received a letter from Portugal. It was from the Lisbon Conservatory, the same school where she had studied as a young woman. They were hosting a special concert to celebrate their 150th anniversary. They wanted to honor former students who had made a difference in the world. And they wanted Maria to perform. She almost said no. Her left hand was still damaged. She still could not play with the speed and precision she once had. The idea of performing on that stage, the same stage where she had once been a rising star, terrified her. But then she thought about all the people who had written to her, all the people who said her story had inspired them to try again. How could she tell them to be brave if she was not brave herself? Maria said yes. The night of the concert, the auditorium was completely full. People had traveled from all over the world to see her. Mr. Nakamura flew in from Tokyo with his entire family. Robert Harrington came from New York. The hotel manager who had almost fired her sat in the 3rd row with tears already in his eyes. Maria walked onto the stage wearing a simple black dress. Her hair was still gray. Her hands were still scarred. She was 63 years old, and she had not performed in public for more than 40 years. But when she sat down at the piano, none of that mattered. She looked out at the audience for a moment. She saw faces full of hope and expectation. She saw people who believed in her, people who had come to witness something special. And then she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The music that filled the auditorium that night was not perfect. There were moments when her left hand faltered, when the notes came out slower than they should have. A professional critic might have found plenty of flaws, but nobody in that room cared about flaws. They cared about truth. They cared about courage. They cared about a woman who had lost everything and found a way to begin again. When the final note of Claire de Lune faded into silence, the audience sat frozen for a long moment. Then, slowly, one person stood up, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding so loudly that the walls seemed to shake. Maria sat at the piano with tears streaming down her face. She thought about her grandmother, who had bought that old broken piano so many years ago. She thought about her mother, who had worked so hard to give her a chance. She thought about the young girl she used to be, full of dreams and hope and music. That girl had never really died. She had just been waiting for the right moment to come back. Maria stood up and bowed to the audience, and as the applause washed over her like a wave, she made a silent promise to herself. She would never stop playing again. Some people go their whole lives without discovering what they are meant to do. Some people find their purpose early and then lose it. But a lucky few get a second chance. An unexpected moment that changes everything. Maria Santos was one of the lucky ones. She had been given a second chance at a time when she least expected it. In a place where she thought she was invisible, and she had been brave enough to take it. That is the true story of the cleaning lady who saved $1 billion deal. Not because she was trying to save anything, but because she finally remembered who she really was. And sometimes, that is enough to change the whole world.